Have you ever faced a moment in life when everything seemed to fall apart? When you felt like no matter how much effort you put in, things simply refused to work out? Maybe you studied hard for something and didn't get the result you expected, or you tried to achieve a goal and life just said, not this time. If that's ever happened to you, you're not alone. Today, I want to take you on a journey about challenges, resilience, and the quiet strength that helps us grow through the hardest times. Welcome to the English Best Podcast. I'm Sarah, and in today's episode, we're going to explore how overcoming challenges in life not only shapes who we are, but also helps us become better communicators, better listeners, and more fluent speakers of English and of life itself. Because language, just like life, is full of obstacles, but every obstacle is a lesson if we listen closely enough. Let's start with a simple story. A few years ago, I met a young man named Daniel, who had just moved to the United States from Brazil. He was intelligent, ambitious, and full of energy, but his confidence in speaking English was low. He understood everything people said, but when it came to expressing his thoughts, his words froze. One day, during a group project in college, his professor asked him to explain his team's research. Daniel felt his heart race, his hands shake, and his mind go blank. He wanted to speak perfectly, but instead of fluency, silence filled the room. After the presentation, he walked home under the rain, feeling defeated. But the next morning, something changed. Daniel made a decision, not to chase perfection, but to chase progress. He started recording himself speaking English every night, describing his day, his thoughts, even his emotions. At first, his pronunciation wasn't smooth, and his grammar was shaky, but he didn't stop. He listened to native podcasts, practiced shadowing dialogues, and spoke to himself in English while cooking breakfast. Slowly, something beautiful happened. His confidence started to grow, not because his English was suddenly perfect, but because he had learned to face the fear of making mistakes. You see, that's the real challenge of language learning and of life itself. We often wait to be ready before we act. But the truth is, no one is ever truly ready. Growth happens in the doing, in the discomfort, in the moments when you fall, reflect, and rise again. When I think about challenges, I often remember my own first months living abroad. I was studying linguistics in California, surrounded by students who seemed so fluent, so confident. Meanwhile, I kept comparing myself, worrying about every small error I made. I thought native speakers would judge me. But one day, a professor told me something that stayed with me forever. She said, "Sarah, the goal is not to sound perfect. It's to be understood, to connect, and to keep learning." That simple sentence changed everything. I began to listen differently, to people, to conversations, even to myself. Instead of listening just to respond, I started listening to understand, and that made all the difference. That's what I want you to do as you listen to this podcast today. Listen not only for words, but for meaning, emotion, rhythm, and intention. Listening in English at an advanced level isn't about understanding every single word. It's about understanding ideas, tone, and flow. When you train your ear to capture these subtle elements, your comprehension deepens naturally. Let's move to another story. This one about my friend Laura. She's an engineer who faced one of the most stressful moments of her life when her company decided to downsize. She suddenly found herself unemployed, unsure what to do next. Instead of rushing to apply for any job, she took a step back. She began listening to herself. What was she passionate about? What kind of work did she actually want to do? Over the next few months, she took online courses, volunteered in her community, and built new skills. Eventually, she found a new job, one that matched not only her qualifications, but her purpose. What I love about Laura's story is how she faced uncertainty with curiosity, not fear. And that's something every advanced English learner should practice too. Curiosity. When you listen to English speakers, whether it's a movie, a podcast, or a real conversation, don't just focus on words you don't know. Be curious. Ask yourself, what emotion does this person express? What kind of tone are they using? What cultural reference are they making? Curiosity transforms listening from a task into a habit, and from a habit into a joy. Another example that always inspires me is my friend Ahmed. He's from Egypt, and a few years ago he decided to train for a marathon. He wasn't a natural athlete, and at first, running even 1 mile felt impossible. But he trained every morning before sunrise, step by step, mile by mile. He told me something I'll never forget. At first, my body was tired, but later I realized it was my mind that needed training. English learning is like that marathon. It's not about how fast you learn, it's about how consistent you are. It's about showing up, even when you don't feel motivated, even when progress feels invisible. Every time you listen to a podcast like this, every time you speak out loud, you're running another mile in your journey. Maybe today you understand 70% of what I say. That's okay. Tomorrow it'll be 75%, then 80%, then 90%. The key is to keep moving forward, not to stop when it gets hard, because fluency isn't a finish line. It's a lifestyle. Now let's talk about something deeper: emotional challenges. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Maybe it's losing a job, ending a relationship, or moving to a new country where you feel like a stranger in your own skin. Those moments are uncomfortable, even painful, but they are also the moments that teach us who we really are. There's a phrase in English I love: growth begins at the end of your comfort zone. And it's true, not just for life, but for language too. When you force yourself to speak English, even when you're nervous, when you listen to native speakers, even when they speak fast, you're stretching that comfort zone. You're training your mind to handle uncertainty with calm and confidence. That's the foundation of both resilience and fluency. Let me tell you one last story before we take a reflective pause. A few years ago, my friend Emily decided to start her own business. She had an idea for a small bakery that offered international desserts. But the beginning was hard. Her recipes failed, her customers were few, and she doubted herself daily. But instead of giving up, she treated every failure as feedback. She learned from customer comments, adjusted her recipes, and improved her service. A year later, her bakery became one of the most popular spots in her neighborhood. When I asked her what changed, she said, "I stopped seeing problems as punishment and started seeing them as practice." That simple mindset, seeing challenges as practice, applies perfectly to English learning. Every difficult listening exercise is practice. Every awkward conversation is practice. Every mistake you make is not a sign of failure. It's proof that you're trying, and that effort is what separates dreamers from doers. So, as we close this first part of today's episode, I want you to take a deep breath and think about your own challenges, both in life and in English. Ask yourself, what is one obstacle I've faced recently that taught me something? Maybe it was a conversation you didn't fully understand. Maybe it was a moment when you couldn't find the right words. Instead of judging yourself, thank yourself for trying. Because every time you try, you grow. And that growth, even when it's invisible, becomes your greatest strength. Remember, fluency is not about speaking fast. It's about speaking from experience. It's about connecting your words with your emotions, your thoughts with your actions, your listening with your understanding. Have you ever noticed that some of the most successful people you know are not the ones who never fail, but the ones who fail and keep going anyway? That's because challenges don't just test your patience, they reveal your mindset. Think about it. When something goes wrong, do you immediately think, why is this happening to me? Or do you ask, what can I learn from this? That small shift in thinking can change everything, not only in life, but in how you approach English learning too. When you face a difficult listening exercise or an accent that feels impossible to understand, instead of feeling frustrated, you can choose to feel curious. Ask yourself, what's new about this? What is my brain trying to figure out? That curiosity turns difficulty into discovery. Let me tell you a story about my student Hannah. She moved to Chicago to study business and loved the city, but English was still her biggest challenge. She could read and write fluently, but listening was her weak point. Every time someone spoke quickly, she felt lost, embarrassed, and afraid to ask for repetition. One day, she attended a seminar led by a fast-talking American professor. At first, she couldn't follow a single sentence, but instead of tuning out, she did something different. She focused on the rhythm, the tone, the stress patterns, the music of English. By the end of the lecture, she realized she had understood far more than she expected. Later, she told me something that really touched me. She said, "Sarah, I realize listening is not about catching every word. It's about catching the meaning." That lesson changed her life, and it can change yours too. Because once you stop chasing perfection and start focusing on connection, your whole experience with English becomes lighter, freer, more human. It's like learning to dance. You can't memorize every step. You just need to feel the rhythm. Another story that comes to mind is about my friend Omar. He's from Jordan and works as an architect. A few years ago, he was invited to give a presentation at an international design conference in New York. It was his dream opportunity. But there was a problem. He was terrified of public speaking in English. The night before the event, he couldn't sleep. He practiced his script again and again, afraid he might forget a word. The next day, standing on that stage, his hands were shaking, his voice cracked, and for a moment, he blanked out. But instead of running off stage, he smiled. He took a deep breath, looked at the audience, and said, "Sorry, I just need 1 second to remember why I'm here." The crowd laughed kindly. That small, authentic moment changed everything. He finished his talk beautifully, and after the conference, people came up to congratulate him. When I asked him later what he learned, he said, "I realized that speaking English isn't about being perfect. It's about being real." That's such a powerful truth. Whether you're speaking to one person or 1,000, fluency doesn't mean never hesitating. It means continuing even when you do. It's okay to pause, to breathe, to find your words. Because when you do, you give yourself permission to be human. And people connect with that far more than with perfection. Let's pause here for a moment. I want you to reflect on your own learning journey. Think about one time you spoke English and felt uncomfortable. Maybe you couldn't express an idea clearly, or you made a mistake and felt embarrassed. Now, instead of replaying that moment as a failure, try to replay it as feedback. What did it teach you? Did it help you understand how to explain something differently next time? Did it show you what kind of words or phrases you still need to learn? When you reframe mistakes as teachers, every conversation becomes a lesson, and every lesson moves you closer to mastery. Speaking of lessons, let's talk about patience. In today's fast-paced world, we're all used to instant results. We order food, it arrives in minutes. We click a button, and information appears. But learning, real, deep, lasting learning, takes time. I remember one of my friends, Michael, who wanted to improve his pronunciation. He practiced tongue twisters every morning for months and listened to himself carefully to identify small improvements. At first, progress was slow, almost invisible. But one day during a meeting, someone told him, "Wow, your English sounds so natural now." That compliment made all those quiet hours worth it, because that's how success works. It happens slowly, then suddenly. The same applies to life's bigger challenges too. When you face failure after failure, it's easy to believe that nothing is changing. But change often grows silently, like roots beneath the surface. The key is to keep nurturing it, to keep showing up, even when results aren't visible yet. Let me tell you another story. My friend Rebecca decided to move to Canada to start a new chapter in her life. She left behind her job, her comfort, and even her family. The first few months were rough. She struggled with the cold, the culture, and the language, but she never gave up. Every morning, she wrote 3 things she was grateful for. Every evening, she listened to one English podcast episode before bed. Slowly, her listening skills improved, her confidence grew, and she began making friends from around the world. One day, she called me and said, "Sarah, I finally feel like I belong here." And that's what challenges do. They eventually turn struggle into strength. So, if you're listening right now and you're in a difficult phase, please remember that what feels like chaos today might become your story of courage tomorrow. Every chapter of your life, even the messy ones, teaches you vocabulary and resilience. And trust me, resilience is one of the most powerful words you can learn, both in English and in life. Now let's talk about something every advanced learner eventually faces: plateaus. That stage when you've learned so much already, but progress suddenly feels slower. You can understand movies, join conversations, and express ideas, but improvement becomes less visible. That's when many learners give up. But that's also when real mastery begins. The plateau is not a sign that you're stuck. It's proof that you've moved from basic learning to refinement. Just like an athlete perfecting their form, you're now polishing the small details: rhythm, tone, phrasing, emotional nuance. The only way to move past the plateau is to stay consistent and intentional. So here's a small practice you can try this week. Every day, listen to 5 minutes of native English audio, a podcast, an interview, or even a TV show clip. Then pause and summarize what you heard out loud. Don't worry about repeating every word perfectly. Focus on expressing the main ideas. This kind of active listening transforms passive learning into real communication. The more you do it, the more natural your English will sound. And as you speak, record yourself. Listen to your own voice, not to judge it, but to understand it. Hearing yourself is like holding up a mirror for your thoughts. It helps you notice patterns, rhythm, and even emotions in your speech. When you listen actively to others and to yourself, you train your brain to process English naturally, without translation. That's how true fluency begins. As we come to the end of this second part, I want you to think of English as a living experience, not a subject. Every story you hear, every conversation you have, every challenge you overcome in this language adds a new layer to who you are becoming. You're not just learning English, you're learning courage, you're learning connection, you're learning to see the world through a wider lens, and that's something to be proud of. So if this podcast helped you reflect, practice, or feel inspired, take a second to pause right now. Like, literally, pause, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave a comment about what challenge you're overcoming in your English journey, and share this episode with a friend who might need a little motivation today. Because learning together is always more powerful than learning alone. And when you share what you learn, you don't just help others, you reinforce your own growth. Every time I talk about challenges, I can't help but think about how universal they are. No matter where we come from, what language we speak, or what dreams we have, life tests all of us in some way. And yet, the difference between those who grow and those who give up isn't talent, luck, or even intelligence. It's how they respond when things don't go as planned. Challenges reveal not what we have, but what we choose to believe. And that belief shapes our actions, our words, and even our voice. I remember when I first started learning French, I was so passionate at the beginning. I watched movies, listened to music, practiced pronunciation. But then one day I hit that wall. That moment where everything suddenly feels too hard. I couldn't understand the fast conversations, and I started doubting myself. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe languages weren't my thing. But one morning, as I sat in a cafe, I overheard two people speaking French beside me. And without even trying, I understood their conversation. That moment felt like magic. It reminded me that learning is not always visible. Progress happens quietly, behind the scenes. It builds while we're frustrated, it grows when we're patient, and it blooms when we least expect it. And that's exactly what I want you to remember about your English journey. You are growing even when you don't see it. The effort you put in, every word you listen to, every story you repeat, every mistake you correct, it's all creating invisible progress. You might not see it today, but one day someone will tell you, "Wow, your English sounds so natural." And you'll smile because you'll know it didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet moments when you chose to keep going. Let's talk about fear, because it's one of the biggest reasons people stop learning or improving. Fear of making mistakes, fear of sounding wrong, fear of being judged. But here's a truth that every confident speaker learns eventually. Fear doesn't disappear, it transforms. You don't wait for fear to leave, you move with it. You speak even when your heart beats faster, you try even when your voice shakes. That's what real courage sounds like. Think about it. Every time you listen to English and understand something new, your brain celebrates. Every time you say something you couldn't say before, your confidence grows. That's the power of persistence. I had a listener once, her name was Julia. She used to message me after every episode saying she wanted to sound more natural but felt stuck. I told her something simple. Stop focusing on sounding perfect and start focusing on sounding real. Instead of memorizing phrases, she began describing her day, her feelings, her opinions, in her own words. After a few months, she sent me a voice message, and I could hear the difference instantly. Her voice was alive, not perfect, but authentic. And that authenticity is what native speakers connect to. Because English isn't a performance, it's a conversation. It's not about showing what you know, it's about sharing who you are. So if you've been hiding behind fear, let this be your sign to step out and speak up. Make mistakes proudly, because the more you speak, the more you learn. The more you listen, the more you understand. And the more you live through English, the more it becomes part of who you are. I want to share one last story before we wrap up. It's about a man named Thomas, an engineer from Germany who joined one of my early online workshops. He was brilliant but incredibly shy about speaking. During our first session, he barely said a word. But he kept showing up, every week, listening carefully, taking notes, practicing in silence. Then one day during a group discussion, he unmuted his mic and said, "I think I finally understand what confidence means. It's not speaking without fear. It's speaking even when you're scared." That moment stayed with me because it was so true. Confidence is not a gift. It's a skill. You build it by practicing, by failing, by learning, by trying again. And that's why this episode is called Overcoming Challenges in Life, because language learning is a reflection of life itself. You fall, you rise. You fail, you grow. You struggle, you adapt. English just gives you another way to experience that growth through words, through stories, through connection. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Every challenge you face, whether it's understanding fast English, expressing complex thoughts, or feeling stuck at your level, is shaping you into a stronger communicator. Don't run away from the hard parts, lean into them. Let every struggle become a teacher. When you can't understand a podcast, listen again. When you forget a word, describe it another way. When you feel like you're not improving, remind yourself of how far you've already come. And never forget, every fluent speaker you admire was once exactly where you are now, confused, nervous, and uncertain. The only difference is that they didn't stop. So don't stop. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep speaking. Keep believing. Because fluency is not a finish line. It's a lifestyle. And if you stay consistent, it's impossible not to improve. Before I close today's episode, I want to give you a small practice you can try right after listening. When this episode ends, take 5 minutes and speak out loud about something that challenges you in your life right now. Describe how it makes you feel, what you're learning from it, and how you're overcoming it. All in English. Don't write, don't plan. Just speak freely. If you want, record it and listen back later. You'll be surprised at how much more natural and confident you sound than you think. This simple habit, reflecting in English, helps you connect emotion with language, which is one of the secrets to fluency, because English isn't just about vocabulary, it's about voice, your voice. So use it. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with a friend who might need a little motivation or listening practice today. It helps the channel grow, and it helps more learners like you find content that builds confidence. You can also leave a comment telling me which part of today's story resonated with you the most. I read every comment, and it means the world to know that these stories are helping you grow in your English journey. Remember, you are not just learning a language. You are learning a way of expressing your ideas, your dreams, your identity, and that's something incredibly powerful. Every new word you learn, every sentence you understand, every emotion you express in English, it's proof of your courage. So keep that courage alive. Keep your heart open, your ears curious, and your voice brave. Because life will always have challenges, but you will always have the power to rise above them. And every time you do, your English and your confidence will rise with you. This is Sarah from English Best Podcast, reminding you that challenges are not walls. They're doors. Doors to growth, to connection, and to becoming the person you're meant to be. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode, where we'll continue to explore English, life, and the stories that connect us all. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and keep speaking from the heart.